leadership roles at Slack, at Twitter, and at Apple. And he's held executive roles at Google and at the Obama Foundation. And Leslie's going to talk to us today about decolonizing your data. So he's going to tell us about how biases are in all of our data and how we can remedy that. So over to you, Leslie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy, I guess, to be in my house because that's where many people are these days. And thank you all for watching and being here today. I appreciate anyone who is here and all of y'all around the world. Thank you for joining us today. And I hope this is useful. I'll admit I had a little bit of trouble putting this together. It's just such a weird time, and it's weird, I'm sitting here, I'm doing this, and I'm doing it from home, and I'm like, and I'm not going to be on stage, and I'm not going to see people. It's going to be quiet. I don't get any, nobody's going to humor me and laugh at my bad jokes. So now I have to humor myself. So I'll probably be laughing at all my bad jokes. I've been thinking about like just how everything is like, just our data is so dirty, right? Our data has so much of all of our biases and all of our, the good things about human and the bad things about human. Unfortunately, the bad things seem to pop up more often than not. And I think about it, I'm actually on the East Coast right now. I live in San Francisco, but I'm on the East Coast. And I'm fairly close to Richmond, Virginia. And I was just thinking about like data diversity and how all of our data is dirty and what we can start doing to decolonize. And I'll give you an example. In Richmond, Virginia, there's this street called Monument Avenue. And Monument Avenue has a bunch of monuments. And the monuments are generally monuments to Confederate generals, politicians, whatever. And they just they used to line the streets up until last year when people finally did the right thing and tore them down. And I was looking at that, and then I came home and I started to just plot some data and look at data and did just mapped it out and said, what is the ethnic density or ethnic makeup of housing, of people living along Monument Avenue? And for like 20 blocks in north and south direction and 6 blocks in the east and west direction, it's 99% white, which shouldn't surprise anyone, because why would an African American or somebody self-identifying as African American want to live with the president of the Confederacy outside their front door? But it's also one of the most desirable, if you think about it, places to live in Richmond. Has one of the highest property values in Richmond. And it was amazing to me. And then you can look and see it on the map. It's like, it's literally plain as day. And then I start thinking about how that gets populated elsewhere, and how the data that comes from that is essentially what I would just term as like colonial. It's colonial data. It's racism. It's discrimination, and it's all baked in, and it's baked into property values, and it's baked into school systems. It's just like baked into everything. I was like, this is crazy. And then how do you even begin to remove that? And why was this been okay for so long? I mean, when you just look at the data, you look at there and you walk through, there are no Black people. And you look at the data, there's no Black people. And you think about, for years, decades, generations, people have walked and driven down these roads, and they were okay with it. They were okay with Jefferson Davis. They were okay with Stonewall Jackson. They were okay with these people who were fighting to preserve human bondage and mutilation and murder and rape. And people were okay with it for generations driving by. And I said to myself, there's no way you could have any place in Germany a statue of Goebbels or Hitler or this just wouldn't happen. And for me, Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson are the equivalent of the Nazi perpetrators of the Holocaust, because they enslaved my ancestors and they murdered them and they raped them. And yet people were okay with the data. People were, when I say okay with the data, they were okay seeing this data every day and not questioning it until recently. So anyway, so that's just kind of like where I'm at today and why I've been thinking about this and what it kind of means. And I know it's probably not that germane to our discussion, but it means a lot to me because I don't have to look at Stonewall Jackson or Jefferson Davis statues anymore, which is amazing. Or Robert Lee, I even forgot that guy's name, which I hope I never have to say it again. Next slide, please. So spoiler alert, I think I did the spoiler already. Let's just keep clicking through until this slide is done. Bias is everywhere in your data. And I do mean it is everywhere. It's in your applicant tracking system. You know, it's in, let's keep going through the slide. Yep, it's in your performance management systems if you have them. It's in your code review tools. And it's in your injury settlement claims. And I put that in there because I have recency bias, since we're talking about bias. And I just saw an article 2 or 3 days ago, and I wanted to include it in here. Next slide. And I'll come to it in a minute, but you know, there are many types of biases, right? There's recency bias, there's sample bias, there's bias of inclusion, there's measurement, there's observer, there's racial, and there's association. And all of these are well researched, all of these are well understood, and all of us can go and find them out. So I'm not going to like give you, you know, oh, this is recency, this is sample, this is exclusion. All of y'all are smart, you know how to use the internet, obviously, because you're watching this. And if you don't know how to use the internet and watching this, tell me because I want to know. And I just like, these are things that we've known, and yet we don't do anything about. We still have algorithms that show Black people when you type in criminals. We still have algorithms that you know, that inadvertently redline. Where I live in San Francisco, this is hilarious. Where I live in San Francisco, I can't get pizza from a particular place. I just can't, because I'm in Bayview Hunters Point. And yet people 2 or 3 miles farther from the place where the pizza place is can get pizza, but I can never get pizza from this place. If I want pizza from this place, I have to either drive and go get it or get pizza from another place. And it's just tied into everything. So I obviously don't eat pizza from that place because they won't deliver to me. But I just think it's crazy. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Pretty please. So as I said, I had recency bias. Can we click through and bring the whole slide on? I thought I was going to do this myself, but our tools weren't working. So retired Black players say NFL brain injury payouts show bias. For those of you who have paid attention to some of the sports here in the United States, the National Football League, American Football League, settled a huge lawsuit for billions of dollars for former players, because they had been downplaying the frequency, cause, and the impact of multiple concussions, and they're going to just do terrible things cognitively and psychologically, and there's a great trove of data about this. But something interesting happened. So 75% of NFL players are Black over the last 30 years. Yet the majority of the league's 20,000, so the majority of the league's 20,000 retirees are Black. So if you look at about 75, maybe 80% are Black. And yet only a quarter of the more than 2,000 men who sought awards for early to moderate dementia have qualified under the program. So that's kind of crazy. That's like 500 people out of 2,000 are qualified. Well, why is that? Well, the NFL has this means testing for who qualifies. And the means testing is, they say, here's what we've baselined for your cognitive function. And here's the bar where if you do a test now and you fall below this bar, we'll essentially let you take part in the settlement. But they do something weird. They call it race norming. So they actually start the bar for white people at one level and Black players at a lower level. And you qualify for the settlement if the delta between the two is greater than a certain percentage. And so you think about race norming. It's like it literally, the sample size for the person, I think it's called the Hayton something or another. You know, like look at my notes here. It's called the Hayton norms, which I think is a great name, Hayton norms, because I'm hating these norms. They literally sampled less than 500 Black people, all from San Diego. Not representative of the United States, not representative of mixed race, not representative of anything except where this guy was doing his study in San Diego. And so now thousands, if not tens of thousands of players cannot get a settlement because of this, what they call race norming. And this is the how pernicious when your data is dirty. This is how pernicious when people don't start questioning what they came up with and what they're basing their data and their results on. And it was amazing to me. I read that, I was just like, that's crazy. And no one would do that. And literally they had to go to court, and the court even said, yeah, this is called discrimination. You can't do this. And they're just like, well, yes, of course we can, because this is how the settlement was done. It's like, well, who's looking at the settlement? Who came up with that? And did anybody even know what a Hayton norm was? I just think that's a great term too, Hayton norm. Anyway, let's hope that the NFL does the right thing. But if we've seen anything over the last 20 years, it takes a lot to get the NFL to move. So back on something else, back on probably more topical. What about code reviews? I've dug into this. I dug into it at Google a little bit. I dug into it before I was at Google. I dug into it when I was at Twitter, and it's really funny because there's so much tied to bias in code reviews and bias in internal systems, and so few companies are willing to look at it. Next slide, please. So observer/gender bias in code reviews. I mean, you can all read this, but this is just crazy. So this is from GitHub, and I know there may be some people from GitHub on here, so sorry about that. If you look at the words that are used, if you look at the data, and I have a site that you can go and look at and look this up, it's obvious that male toxicity exists in code reviews. It is just so obvious, and it's amazing that it takes organizations, so long to get to it. I mean, this is just this is just in GitHub, and this is just 3 out of the 6 projects were not only critical of their female counterparts, but also withheld positive encouragements. And that struck me because I've seen the exact same studies, and I've helped do some of the studies, and I've seen the exact same data in performance reviews. I've seen the exact same data in applicant tracking, which means applicant tracking means that these are interviews for you to get a job. It's amazing how pernicious, how embedded this toxic culture is when I say decolonizing, I mean, it literally, you have to decolonize. You have to start. I have a friend, she's a like a professional gardener, just does amazing work. And her specialty is decolonizing gardens. She actually goes in and takes out all the invasive species, replants the native species, and hopefully they all thrive. And I've talked to her about this, and it's almost like the same thing. You just have to go in and start ripping things out. And sometimes you have to take out the soil. Sometimes you have to treat the soil differently to get rid of what the other plants have put in the soil. And I think it's the same here with data, is that you have to start just ripping out the systems and the people who are doing this, because you can't, a lot of times you can't change. And this is all in there. I mean, and we've all gone through this. We don't use master slave anymore for database, right? We don't use whitelist and blacklist anymore, right? But these have always been there. This is not new. And all of us who have been doing this for more than 5 years looked at that, used this language, not all of us, but probably the majority of us have looked at that, used that language for years and years and years, much like people walked by Stonewall Jackson, Robert Lee, and Jefferson Davis on Monument Avenue. And we've become domesticated, and it's okay. And then we try to do what I think in many ways looks performative. And it's like we're not going to use master slave anymore. We're not going to use master bedroom. We'll use primary bedroom. We're not going to use whitelist. We're not going to blacklist. We'll use something else. But it's even deeper a company that I've worked with in the past, they had systems in their technology, and they termed it as watermelon. And it took years before that term was deprecated. And almost every Black employee at this company had something to say about it, and yet it remained, because they're like, well, that's not what we mean. And I'm like, well, it doesn't sometimes matter what you mean. It means the intent, right? People walked by Jefferson Davis statue and said, well, we're just honoring our Confederate, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's the impact. It means people don't want to live there. So this is just something that I'm going to keep coming back to, which is you have just about everything, and not its intent, but its impact. Because if you're not questioning the impact, and if you're just questioning the intent, you'll always find a way to do the easier thing. I have recency bias. I was reading about Bill Gates today, and if people from Microsoft are on here, they're probably not going to be happy to hear this. But not so much about Bill Gates, but about toxicity, about harassment, about sexual harassment in companies. And it hit me that companies have a legal obligation to investigate all reports of sexual or racial discrimination or harassment, hostile workplace. They legally have to do that here in the United States, and that is a great thing. But they legally don't have to find any cause. As a matter of fact, the incentive is against finding a cause, because if they find a cause, they're going to have to act on it. And that can get really expensive really fast. And I'll give you an example. When James Damore was at Google and he wrote his Tech Bro Manifesto, and then got into a little bit of trouble about it and it caused this huge uproar, I had a suggestion. I was like, you know what we should do? We should look at all of James Damore's interviews, everyone he's interviewed. And we should see what scores he gave women, what scores he gave men, what scores he gave people of color, what scores he gave the majority group. We should look at all of his peer reviews. We should look at all of his code reviews. We should look at everything and take and literally use a social graph and find the pockets of toxicity, the pockets of this is how you decolonize data. It's like we could do this, and I could assure you we will find that he has been discriminating. It's like, I know this. It's like he's bold enough to have been doing this for years, and he finally got the courage to just come out and straight and do this. And no one was interested in taking me up on that. And it's because their incentive is not to. The incentive is if they did that, they'd find dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of people who were exhibiting this kind of behavior based upon the data that they have, that they could prove. And then they would have to make some very, very hard choices. Easy choices by me, because that's called decolonizing. That's ripping all those old plants out, treating the soil, and putting native plants in. But Google didn't want to do that. And they didn't want to do it because the incentive isn't there to do it. The incentive is just to investigate. The incentive isn't to find cause. And that's part of the problem, is that when we do that, we're really thinking about what it takes, and whether it's the right thing to do. To me, it's always the right thing to do. It's the right thing to get the environment to be healthier, and not just productive for one small or one large group of people or plants, for that matter. So I probably talked about that. You probably don't want to hear that anymore. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, performance management. This is something that I seem to have lived most of my life in the last 2 years, and keep going there. Yeah, here all the words. Words matter, and they matter a lot, obviously. Words like initiative, quiet, aggressive, pushy, abrasive, confidence. These are all words that recently were used to describe women in the performance cycle I just finished this year. This person doesn't take initiative. This person's too quiet. They need to speak up more. This person is a little bit aggressive. This person is a little bit abrasive. This person seems to be lacking confidence. And no one ever asks why. Or they just and this is why I'm not rating this person this. This is why I'm not rating this person this. And the good thing is that I can bring that up and say, here's what we're doing. And after sitting through calibration after calibration after calibration, many of you have done this before, and you all have my sympathy. I finally said, I just heard these words more with women in the ones I was in. I wasn't in all of them, but and what does this say? What does this say about us? And in some meetings, in the meeting, I had to say, why are you saying this about it? It's like, why is speaking up, a proxy for good performance? And it puts people on the spot. And yet, if I didn't say it, no one was going to else was. And this is, once again, this is walking by the statue on Monument Avenue. This is seeing this behavior over and over again and just becoming used to it and not even thinking about it and not thinking about the impact that it has. And it's just been kind of crazy for me. I'll give you some data. 59, almost 60% of men's reviews in large performance management systems contain critical feedback for women, while 59% contain critical feedback total, while 87% of the reviews women received from these men received critical feedback. Not only did women receive more criticism in their performance reviews, it was less constructive and more personal. For example, the critical feedback was geared towards suggestions to develop additional skills, whereas women, it was, you need to be nice, you need to build trust, you need to do all these things that can't be measured so we can keep bringing them back up over and over again and keeping you in the same place. And I say that with as much irony and disgust as I possibly can, because I've seen it over and over again. And it's also happened to me. I've been told I'm too aggressive. I've been told I'm scary or I'm angry. Then also I've been told I don't take the initiative. Because I was compensating for being too aggressive and too angry and too intimidating. It's like you can't win for losing. And when you're a person of color, when you are an underrepresented, person in your workforce, that's going to come out more. And this is something that as we sit, and as those of us at large companies, and we go through our performance management cycles, is to keep this in mind. And you can't not keep it in mind. It's not going to fix itself. And you have to be hyper vigilant. And I'm not saying that the person of color and the women need to be hyper vigilant. I'm saying the men who don't have to worry about this need to be hyper vigilant. The allies, the accomplices, the people who say they want to help change the system. Well, this is how you help change the system. You help change the system by engaging in these conversations in the moment, not afterwards and say, hey, Bob, I heard you say that. And what does it mean? It's like you do it in the moment so everyone can learn and so everyone can see how important it is. Next slide. Oh, hey, look at that brash. It came up the last, thanks. Words really, really, really matter. Managers use more positive words to describe men and more negative ones to describe women. And that still happens today. I watched it in the last couple of months. It's crazy. And here are some words. There's a citation here. Find these words. And here's the thing that bothers me. We know these words. They're in lists all over the internet. Any of us can easily run this in our performance management systems and find them. And this is, I come back to like the James Damore example. And then you can just create a real simple social graph of who's using these types of words. And then you'll actually find the toxicity and you'll find what you need to decolonize, the people you need to decolonize and get them out of your system. And I'm not going to say you need to ban these words, because I don't think you can really ban some of these words. What I do think is that you need to understand the context that they're being used in. And if you see them being used more for people of color, if you see them being used more for women, if you see them being used more for LGBTQ, you've got a problem. And I can almost assure you, if you've got more than 100 people, if you've got a performance management system, you've probably got a problem, and you don't know it. There's anecdotal evidence, people will talk about it, but now you can go in and start mining this data and understanding it, and then start developing programs. What programs? I'm not in people, I'm not in HR, I can't tell you. But I do think that bringing this up and holding people's feet to the fire to do something about it is the first step. And if anyone tells you they can't or they won't, then they are keeping their heads in the sand purposefully. And yes, companies don't want to do this. I'll be honest, they don't want to do it because it's going to show in many cases that they've been biased and that they could be legally liable, and civilly liable for this. But if we don't fix it now, when are we going to fix it? It's just, to me, it's like, it's crazy. We should just do this. Oh my goodness. I look at some of my notes and I'm just kind of crazy. It's just kind of crazy. I think lastly, if you do go through and you do this and you do find these words, it's really important to publish them and let people know. And let people know, it's like, you not to not use them, but understand that they are being used, and they are being used along gender, along racial lines, and that people have to try to start educating themselves as to why, and what they can do in lieu of using words like that. Let's go to the next slide. It's one of my favorites. Applicant tracking systems are crazy because they have all this data that we try to use in really simple terms, right? It's like, oh, do we have ethnic data? Do we have age? Do we have this? We have that. But we never look at things like people's names, or the name of the school, or the name of the company, or the name of the projects or technologies. And you can start to mine that data and see if all of if you're over indexing on a particular school or particular type of name or a particular company or projects or technologies. And this is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's a watch out. It's a watch out if it's a watch out if at Twitter, they had this great tool where you can go and look and literally type in a school and see how many people went to that school. Or you can just go and look and see how many people total went to school or had a particular degree or worked at a particular company. And I remember looking at this over and over again, and because it bothered the hell out of me. And I'm like, we like University of Michigan, all of these are overrepresented. It's like the only place that you could hire people in with computer science degrees. And no one ever thought that was an issue. Anyone could look at this, and many people did, and no one thought it was an issue that 25% of particular managers all went to 2 different schools or 3 different schools. Nobody thought that was an issue. And these are the signs that you have a problem. And these are this is the data that exists that you can start mining. You can start asking hard questions, start answering questions as well. If people of color, if women don't feel comfortable, look at where people have all gone to school. If they've all gone to school, gone to the same 6 schools, maybe that's why. If they've all worked at the same 3 companies, maybe that's why. If they've all, think about the things we say. We're a Rails shop. That's something I hear a lot. We're a Rails shop. We're a Java shop. We're a Scala shop. We're an R. And you're like, well, that's exclusionary. And one of the things I've been trying to do in my hiring lately is that I actually don't care if you know Rails or not. I don't care if you know Scala or not. I just care if you're an engineer. And if you're an engineer, you can learn this. There's domain expertise that you want, right? But at the end of the day, I don't care what language, and I'm not going to use that as a proxy for whether you're a good engineer. You're a good engineer if you're an engineer, and you can come in and solve engineering problems, and we should have assessments that do that. It's just been crazy. there's also like anti-patterns that are in here that we look for, or that I look for, like community and civic involvement. I look for those things because sometimes they point to people who are going to bring a different perspective, who have done more than just sat in front of a computer. Um, this is really interesting, I mean, and I maybe should have touched upon this in performance management. In the last 14 months, many of us have been working from home. And as many of you have seen the data, it's really falling on women in the workplace or excuse me, at home to pick up a lot of the slack. And their work is suffering. And if we think that the performance management systems are taking that into consideration, and managers are taking that into consideration, we're wrong. And how are we, as technologists, how are we factoring that in? How are we looking at our data and asking, was there a step function change in how women have been rated this cycle? Is there a step function change in the language that was used? And something that I actually just asked was like, have we looked to see, if intersectionally, who's taking time off, and whether or not we're seeing women take more time off because of that responsibility they have, and how are we supporting that part of our population here at work? It's just it's like all these things that your data can answer, and that no one's asking. It's like very few people are asking that question. So sorry, I'm kind of riffing here because I had too much coffee this morning. Next slide, please. Performance management. Just some final words here about performance management. Just don't stack rank people. It's bad. Wow, that just stuck that way. That's cool. Don't stack rank people. It's bad. Don't do forced distributions. I just, every time I would get an email and say, oh, we're not fitting the distribution we should, and I'm like, the world changed. Get that out of my face. It's crazy. Yeah, there's no distribution that can take into account a pandemic. So get this shit out of here. I'm sorry, that's how I feel. Like, don't come in here and tell me I have to hit a distribution. It's like people just went through, we have a distribution to hit. And then when I ask the question, it's like, did we take this into account? People are like, well, no. And I'm like, well, why not? How come we didn't take it into account? Why are we even doing a forced distribution? Lastly, I think transparency is a great disinfectant. Publish your banned words and phrases. Let everyone know. Let everyone know what they are. Let everyone know how you came about them, and that you're going to continue to evaluate it. It goes such a long way to building trust, and letting people know that everyone cares. And it's difficult, right? I mean, people get sensitive about it. Basecamp, who heard that company's name the last couple of weeks? They had inappropriate language all throughout their infrastructure, and they were defending it. They were defending it because Jefferson Davis has been on that monument and that pedestal for 80 years. Why should we remove him now? That's why. And once it became uncomfortable, people wanted to shut down the conversation. And that's why you publish. That's why you have transparency. And that's why it should always be a topic at companies' all hands, because if you're not talking about it, it's easy to just slide back into, it's okay that we're not doing anything, because it's not hurting anyone, and our intent is good, and we're a good place to work. I had something about rats in a dead tree, and I had a story, and I honestly can't remember it. So if anybody remembers the story about the rat and the dead tree, let me know. Next slide, please. You don't need to be woke, but you need to be awake. I think I may have made that up, or I cobbled it together. Yeah, people don't all need to be woke. And I firmly believe that, but I think people need to be awake, and they need to ask the hard questions. They need to not buy into intent. Impact is everything. And when you're impacting people negatively, it's not just that moment, it stays with them throughout their career. I can tell you every time I have been marginalized in my career, every time. I've remembered every one. And I can name the people, and I can name the place, and I can name the company. And if you don't think that people remember that shit, they do. So impact is everything. Hold your leaders accountable. And sometimes the only way we can hold our leaders accountable is to call them out and name it during an all hands. Name it when someone asks. And it's uncomfortable for people to do. I have done a couple of things because sometimes I just don't want to be that guy, right? That guy who's always saying something. So I just now go and I talk to allies. I talk to people who I think are understanding and who may not be woke but are definitely awake, and I ask them for help. And I say, I need you to add your voice to this. And I'm asking you to do this because I'm hoarse. I've talked too much, and it really does help. And people, I think, today are more willing to do that than ever before. I mean, I've so many stories at a particular company that I won't name, Twitter, where I would go and ask people, and they just would be like, "Yeah, I don't feel comfortable doing that." And I'm just like, "I just had somebody say something really demeaning to me in a meeting, and you don't feel comfortable standing up for me." It's like, "Oh yeah, it was totally wrong, but I'm just not in a position right now to do that." And I'm like, "Well, what position do you think I'm in?" And so when you see it, call it out. When you hear it, name it, and continue to do that, because I think it's important. Changing systems and processes is hard. Changing people is harder, and a lot of times you have to change the people, and people have to do the homework, and they have to do the work to understand their impact. And if people are not willing to do the work, and your company says it's committed to the work, then the next question is, what are we doing about the people who aren't about that work? Because it's not okay. It's not okay. It's not okay to do the work and have people not be about it, and people work actively against it. And I'm not pounding on Google for any other reason except that it is a really interesting example. Google's problems are not because Google doesn't want to do the right thing. Google's problems are is that it enables people who are still fighting against doing the right thing. And it doesn't take care of them, and it doesn't ask them to leave, and it hasn't drawn that line that people who aren't about this life need to go. They're still trying to be this big tent, but I got to tell you, if your tent contains Nazis, maybe it's the wrong tent. And there are Nazis in organizations, and I think there may be some people in this room who recently had that experience, and you got to call it out, and then you'll find out, you'll find out how committed your leaders are. Last but not least, I tweeted this today, and I think it's important because we all want data to be quantitative, and sometimes it is qualitative. There's there was a time at Twitter when we were talking about, oh, we need to collect all this data, we need to do this, we need to do this. And I'm just like, you don't need to collect data, you just need to go walk through the cafe. You need to know. You don't need to just walk through the cafe, tell me what you see. Come back, and then we'll talk. Bill Gates is in the news a lot today, in the last couple of weeks. There's qualitative data, and this is not a referendum on Bill Gates. It's a referendum on how systems and processes create toxic environments. And I remember this clearly because I just started my career when I heard that Bill Gates was getting married. So that's how long I've been doing this. And he was marrying a product manager at at Microsoft named Melinda. And I'm like, this guy's worth $10 billion and he's marrying a product manager. I'm like, how does that conversation even happen? How do you just like walk up to somebody and it's like, hi, I'm the CEO and I'm worth, one of the richest men in the country. Do you want to go out with me? It's crazy. There's a power differential that exists there and it's crazy. And it was okay. And it's just like, even today, it's like, how's that okay? So many people would feel like they can't say no to something like that. And now like these reports are coming out about his behavior that mirror the reports of just about so many other men in power. And the data is always there. The data is always there. And it may not be quantitative and it's qualitative. And we sometimes have to act on the qualitative data, particularly when it really does impact people. I'm not surprised when I read those stories. And I'm not surprised because if it happened in 1990, 1987, 88, 89, it probably has continued to happen. And the behavior of one executive is probably mirrored in many of the executives. And the data exists because HR could just go and mine their data and say how many, people from this time had sexual harassment complaints, or inappropriate, comments lodged, complaints lodged against them, and they'll see that, and they don't do anything about it, and that is where we come into play, where we have to start holding people accountable. They don't get away just because they're in positions of power. We see where that leads, and it leads to a very, very, very horrible place for us all. Next slide. Which is one of my favorite slides. I want to thank all of y'all for coming and listening to me blather on about this and essentially preach to you for 40 minutes or so. We talk about data. We talk about the power that data is eating the world, that we have this amazing ability to analyze and collate and draw inferences from terabytes of data that can help you navigate from one part of the coast, one part of the country to the other part of the country, which I did, which is amazing. And yet we can't find the serial sexual harasser in a 5 or 10 or 25,000 company. You got to be kidding me. All the data's there. We just have to start decolonizing it and going in there and identifying the non-native, the dangerous, the toxic species, and removing them. And letting people know that this is what it looks like. This is what this not invasive species looks like. This is what's causing our garden not to grow well. And I say that not like we're should go and kill people or fire them indiscriminately. Some people probably need to be fired indiscriminately, but that there's a way that you can do it that is respectful for the people who've been impacted, not for the people who've done the impacting. And that is what we've been biasing towards so long. And I really hope that this is a small part of people learning how to bias towards the people who are impacted and not the ones who are doing the impacting. Thank you. And those of you on the West Coast, have a nice evening. Those of you on the East Coast, I hope you had a nice glass of something. And those of you around the world who are just watching this with your tea or coffee, thank you for joining me in your morning. I appreciate it. Adios.
Thanks so much, Leslie. That was an amazing talk. I'm sure everybody in the room will agree. I see so much applause going on. And I'd like to just give one vocal applause for Leslie so we can hear it, but there's lots of applause emojis coming through, and it's a tough topic to listen to, but one that we really need to discuss for industry, I think. So thanks so much, Leslie.
It literally just that. So hopefully that talk went just as long as it needs to.
I think what I heard is his computer just died of some kind. The video definitely went off. I think we will have to leave it here. And thanks so much, Leslie, again, for coming and giving us this really thought-provoking talk. This also ties nicely into one of our mini keynotes. Lauren, tomorrow in a mini keynote, is going to be talking about her company Multitudes, that's a startup that's looking at data like this and trying to help managers identify when bias is happening by looking at GitHub data. So that will be a nice transition to our mini keynotes tomorrow. And so I look forward to seeing you all in some of the breakout rooms for discussions after this. I think Daniel will be posting momentarily some links for rooms for us to go in and discuss. So even though Leslie unfortunately has dropped off, we can still all continue this conversation in the breakout rooms. And so we will be posting very momentarily some links for us. So go grab a cup of tea or coffee or wine, whatever your time zone is that's appropriate. And we can continue these discussions in some of the breakout rooms. We'll post links soon.
And Kelly, Leslie is on Twitter as well, like our previous keynote speaker, Nicole. His Twitter handle is at the bottom, @Shaft. And like Nicole, Leslie engages with people on Twitter. So if you have questions, please do tweet at him, I think. And yeah, thank you so much, Leslie, again.